Okay, everyone can hear us now.
This presentation is for the In a Crowd Workday Extend Design Best Practices. Our presenters today are Nicholas Trandom and Ken Hong. This webinar will be recorded and we will send it out to those of you who are in attendance. If you have any questions that come up during or after the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A functionality at the bottom of your screen. We have dedicated time after the presentation where Nicholas and Ken will answer questions that are entered in there. And now I will turn this over to Nicholas.
Thanks, Erica. We'll start out with some introductions. For myself, I'm Nicholas Trandom. I'm a manager in our Integration Services Department, also our Workday Extend lead architect. I have over 20 years of technical experience and leadership in full stack custom application development, and I'm excited to be able to use that experience here with Workday Extend. I've been in the ecosystem since 2016 and deeply involved in the cutting edge of Workday technologies. Workday Extend, obviously, also custom integrations and product development. And I'm certified in Extend, Studio, and third-party payroll, and I'm based out of Denver. Ken, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Nicholas. So my name is Ken Hong. I am a principal integration consultant with In a Crowd. I have been in the Workday ecosystem since 2014. Started out 3 years on the customer side, and I've spent the last 3 years here at In a Crowd on the consulting side. With regard to Workday Extend, I've been a part of the Workday Developer Program since the beginning. I have participated in multiple Workday hackathons developing applications on the Extend platform, and I've been involved in designing and architecting several client-facing Extend apps and proposals. And you can see a list of my certifications there on the slide. I am based out in New Jersey, and I'm looking forward to talking with you all today.
Thanks, Ken. A little bit about who InterCrowd is. We are a boutique Workday partner. We have 100% focus on Workday and Workday customers. Within that focus, we pretty much do it all. As you can see, we touch just about every place in Workday: functional integrations, Workday Extend. We are an acknowledged thought leader in Workday Extend, having been involved from the very beginning of that project. And recently, you may have heard that we won the 2020 hackathon for Workday Extend, both the first place and the crowd favorite. We also develop a lot of products to maximize return on investment for Workday customers. And of course, Phase X deployment work, both functional and integration. And we also offer an AMS service, Application Managed Services. It's an on-call center of excellence for getting the most out of Workday. We have a very technical and highly skilled set of consultants here with an average of over 5 certifications per consultant and 22 Workday product leads. So that's a little bit about In a Crowd. Next, we'll kind of talk about what we're gonna go over the rest of our webinar today. So we're gonna talk about the value and the goals of design. We're gonna talk about the components of design, and then we'll get some time at the end for questions. So jumping right in, what is the value of design? Well, design is how we avoid the tar pit. It's an old term in software engineering. A lot of software projects can end up stuck, going round and round in circles, doing a lot of rework, contributes to going over budget and past your deployment date. You know, it's not a good situation, and yet it seems to be somewhat common in software development. So one of the best ways to avoid the tar pit is to give appropriate time and attention to the design of your custom application. And because in Workday Extend, we are talking about custom application design, it's very important that we give it that attention that it really requires. This is a much more custom and free-form thing that we're building here, as opposed to, say, an integration. So, and then we've got some quotes here of perhaps familiar to some of us of what can happen when you get into the tar pit. Now, there is such a thing as analysis paralysis, right? And so we know that even with the best design, we're going to go into build and start finding, oh, there are some gaps and there's some inconsistencies in our design that we didn't think about until we actually started building the thing, right? So the point of sharing this quote here is not that design is worthless. Design is very important, as we talked about on the last slide, but we do have to also realize that once we get into build, there are going to be additional discoveries and we may have to iterate. So with that, I want to hand it over to Ken to talk about the goals of design.
Thanks, Nicholas. So I'm sure some of the audience is probably rolling their eyes saying, oh, yay, yet another design session. Why do we need these? Workday Extend, as Nicholas has pointed out, is just as or more complex than some of the other areas of Workday that you're accustomed to. So whether we're talking about having your app possibly integrate with other systems or having your app interact with the other functional areas inside Workday, things can get very complicated very quickly. So having a detailed design has been a huge key of some of the successes that Innicrowd has had with the Workday Extend platform. First, we want to identify the critical parts of your app that will have the most impact on your business case. After all, you're probably interested in using Workday Extend to get more return on investment from your Workday implementation. So we want to make sure that whatever app we build will have a meaningful impact on the part of your business that we're looking to optimize, supplement, or support. Your internal SMEs are critical to understanding your business case and the processes that we're looking to possibly supplement or replace. So if we are building an application that's going to replace those existing processes, we'll want to map those things out during design, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. Any changes to the flow of the app, any major changes to screens, or really any other part of the app can result in the worst case in a complete re-architecting of the application. Rework's expensive, so let's avoid it if at all possible. When we design a Workday Extend app, inevitably, as we go through discovery sessions and the like, there's definitely going to be some unknowns here. And when as we discuss your app, some of those questions could be functional in nature, technical in nature. It is okay to have some unknowns as long as there won't be any huge impacts to the overall design. The bigger unknowns should definitely be discussed and detailed out. The more unknowns we drive out, the better the overall design will be. And then we can always go back and research some of those smaller unknowns or questions as we iterate through the design process. Okay. Next, I'm going to turn it back over to Nicholas. He'll talk about the components of the designs.
So we've got a couple of building blocks here that we consider to be key components of a comprehensive Workday Extend application design. And the blocks, you can kind of see them named out here. Why are they in this order and why are they here? If we get all of these blocks together, you'll have a really good picture of what your application is going to be. And we've listed them in this order, and we'll go through them in this order because they build on each other. And so you're going to be iterating throughout the design process. You're going to go from discovery to wireframes, and then you're going to go from wireframes to endpoint designs, and then you're going to go back and maybe iterate back into your wireframes based on discoveries you made during the endpoint design phase. And so these will build on each other, but you'll also be iterating back through them as you make more discoveries. And so as we go along, you'll see how these kind of work together and how you can use the insights you come across in a certain phase to help you iterate and refine your design as you go. So I will turn it over then to Ken to talk about the first step, which is discovery.
Great, thanks, Nicholas. So, and you can see here in the graphic a nice picture of Nicholas at a on-site discovery session that him and I attended earlier this year. So, with the discovery sessions, this will most likely be the first time that the Extend development team and your key stakeholders will all be present at the same time. We want to discuss the vision of your app and what it needs to do. If we get this done in one session, great. More than likely, it may take a few sessions. Depends on the complexity of the app, of course. But first key is we have to get everyone together. Obviously, with the current climate, on-site's probably not going to happen. So meeting collaboration software like Zoom, like what we're on today, or WebEx or Microsoft Teams, all those are fair game. We want the collaboration software to have whiteboarding and screen sharing capabilities, pretty much required in order to map out all the things that we want to talk about. The second bullet really speaks to the point that we want the discovery sessions to be a series of conversations. Instead of our Extend team asking you questions or simply having just your stakeholders dictating to us what the app should do, the idea is to have a two-way conversation. This enables things to flow organically. I've done a few of these now, and I'm always amazed at some of the things that we discover when we simply have conversations with each other as far as things that the app could do or what it should be doing. And it's always great to see because it's hard to structure some of those requirements out. Using a whiteboard or some other tool of choice, especially since we're all virtual. Lucid Chart is something that we use here at InnoCrowd fairly often. Visio works great. Even a PowerPoint slide in draft mode with shapes and lines and arrows and things, those work great as well. And why we want a whiteboard is it gives us all flexibility in documenting the things that we'll go through. It's also great for mapping out your existing processes if we're building an Extend application to replace or supplement them. Those existing processes and understanding them is important because it lends additional color to what we're trying to achieve, and it identifies those key aspects that the app can optimize. Okay. Nicholas will talk about what wireframing is here in a minute, but with the whiteboard, we can kind of start to draw out what some of the screens might look like to kind of help drive the conversation. All right. Those rough sketches, great way to visualize what the app might look like. And then lastly, hold internal follow-ups after you get out of these discovery sessions. That's definitely something that our Extend team will do, but from a customer standpoint, you guys should be doing the same. Coming out of those discovery sessions, we'll be talking about a lot of things. Things will be fresh in your mind, and it's very possible that other things may come out of those internal follow-ups. And those things that come up can definitely be incorporated into the design because we're pretty early on in the process. All right. Next, I'll turn it back over to Nicholas.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, we'll talk about wireframes and flows next. As you get into this phase, you want to set expectations for everybody involved. We don't want to do what's called in software engineering world as bike shedding, which is getting all caught up on very minor points of look and feel. And in fact, you want to make sure that it's understood that we're not actually looking at what the application is going to look like. The application is going to look like Workday. That's one of the strong points of Workday Extend. It's going to be easy to upgrade because you're using Workday components. And so it's going to look and feel like the rest of Workday. It's not WYSIWYG, it's more WYGIWYG. What you get is what you get. You're going to have a Workday experience. And so the expectation to set here is that these wireframes are not showing the aesthetics of the application. They're showing the utility of the application. What is the data that's going to be presented to the user? How is the user going to interact with that? And what are the outcomes that are desired from that interaction? And so that's why you can see in these, we have these arrows moving from things like tasks to screens, and then from buttons on the screens to other screens. That's showing how that user is going to flow through the system. And then we call out the aspects, the pieces of data on the individual screens and what they're going to do, and how the user is going to interact with those. And so you'll get a lot of insights once you get to this stage of pieces that weren't talked through perhaps in the discovery sessions. You'll find gaps in understanding or in process that become very apparent when you actually look at what the screens are going to show, how the user's going to act with them, and where they're going to go through the application. And so that is a really important piece, a key piece of your design that you don't want to skimp on. You want to make sure that you go through this and iterate on this. And once you've got your wireframes pretty solid, you can move to the next phase, which Ken will talk about, and that is endpoints.
Great, thanks, Nicholas. So now that we've mapped out what our screens might look like through those wireframes, and then how the app or the screens in the app will flow between different parts of the application, we can now start to see what API calls we might need to make, both within Workday itself or to systems outside of Workday. So the image or the graphic you see here on the slide just shows an example of some API calls that we would need to make on this particular screen in order to get everything fully functional. So in this case, if you kind of see, there's a lookup worker button. So if the user hits that button, there's an API call that would need to be made to go get some details of the worker itself, and also to get some information on whatever we're displaying on the screen here. In this case, it's some ordering information. All right. You can also see some lines coming out of the cancel purchase button or the submit button. Again, more API calls to an external system to either create an order somewhere within an external system or to cancel it. All right. Excuse me. Going through the design of the endpoints will supplement the wireframes and flows that we previously discussed. Okay, so we're talking about flushing out those unknowns before. API calls certainly can generate some questions, some unknowns as far as, well, what do we need to get those API calls working? So by researching those various API calls that we might need, we can also see what other pieces of data we might need to capture within the application. We can also determine if there's pieces of data that maybe need to derived programmatically. All right, so this step is really important because the API calls are going to be used to determine, and we're going to hit the next slide now with Nicholas, on determining the overall architecture and the touch points that the app will be needing to make. So Nicholas, over to you.
Thanks, Ken. So we've talked about the wireframes, the flow of the application, and then using that to inform your what APIs you're going to be using, and then iterating through that. What you're getting to then is kind of a map of your entire application environment and architecture. And what that lets you do then is start diagramming out that architecture, especially around system borders. What are the different systems that are going to be in play? What are the touch points between different systems, or maybe just within Workday with functional areas? You can look at where are the dependencies of your application, as well as what's going to be the impact of the things that the users are doing in your application to these other areas. You know, that could be, again, third-party systems. It could be functional areas within Workday. It could be other Extend apps. It could be other integrations within the Workday tenant that are either used by your application or alongside it that have impacts. And what this will help you to do is define not only your dependencies and your ripple effect, it will also help you to bring in stakeholders that you may not have involved yet, and find out what these impacts are really going to mean across your environment. It's also going to let you start to look at what the security requirements of your application are going to be. What needs to happen at these touch points, especially if we're going outside of the Workday cloud, to protect any data that's going across those wires, right? Either out of Workday or into Workday. How are we going to secure that? So those discussions can naturally flow from your architecture diagram. And then once you have that technical design, you've got your architecture, you've got your wireframes, you've got your flows. Now you can start talking about boiling this down into very concise requirements or use cases, which is what Ken will walk us through next.
Great, thanks, Nicholas. So now that we have all of these artifacts that we've been going through, right? We started with discovery sessions. We came up with wireframes and flow charts of how things should flow. Now we have some idea of the API calls or the endpoints that we're going to need to hit. And then that gives us our overall architecture and the touch points either in or outside of Workday. So now that we have all these things, we can start to develop a list of use cases. This list should, at a high level, serve as an initial list of requirements. So folks in the audience are familiar with Agile methodology. You'll see that we document use cases in the same way as user stories. So for folks on the call who are not familiar with Agile or what user stories are simply just short statements that capture the description of a software feature, all from the perspective of the end user. So here we've listed a couple of examples of what a user story could look like. And you'll see that I've taken the highlighted one and broken it down into 3 components. So the first will be the who. This describes the type of end user that's going to perform this action within the application. So this could just be a general end user, so as a user, or it could be a payroll administrator, it could be an HR partner, whatever other role that describes what type of user is going to be doing this thing that we're stating. Then the next part is the what. This simply describes what the action is, right? So as a user, I want to identify the worker placing a poultry order, as an example. And then lastly, the why. This should describe why the action is important. Perhaps it fulfills a business need. Perhaps it fulfills a dependency that the app is going to need later on downstream. It could describe a specific requirement of the app. All right, so in this case, as a user, I want to identify the worker placing a poultry order so I can make sure the correct worker is charged. Okay. These use cases can also be used to support your end-to-end testing as well. Since we've compiled all these use cases, you have a pretty solid basis for creating your test scenarios. And then as we iterate through the design and even as we go through initial build, as we continue to flush out things, we can certainly add to these use cases if new or modified requirements start to show up. All right. So I'm going to turn it back over to Nicholas at this point.
Thanks, Ken. So we've talked about the major building blocks of your design and how you can use them to build upon each other and to iterate through to get a strong design. And these components that we've called out also correspond very closely to the sections of the standard Workday Extend design template that's provided by Workday on Community. And so that's not only a good thing from the point of view of meeting Workday's kind of best practice around design for Workday Extend, but it also means that if delivery assurance is in scope for your Workday Extend application, you'll be producing exactly the type of artifacts that those delivery assurance consultants are used to looking for and looking through, and it's going to help you with that that DA process. So with that, I'd like to open up the floor for our question and answer period. So Erica, do we have any questions?
Yes, Nicholas, thank you. We do have a few questions. The first one, can you share use cases? What type of custom apps or processes have you seen other clients had requested?
Sure. We've seen quite a few different use cases. There's a couple of good lists that Workday provides as well. But what we've seen are things like company store type applications where you're allowing employees to buy something as a benefit, maybe something that the company produces, or maybe swag for the company, and you want to just take that out of payroll automatically. We have seen related to that sort of protective supplies issuance and tracking. We've seen fleet management. We've seen sort of back to work, for COVID times, reserving workspaces, making sure that they get cleaned correctly. And we've seen other, maybe less ambitious, if you want to say, but very useful Workday Extend use cases around things like the built-in user interface for a particular task doesn't expose fields that are there in the web services. So the end users aren't able to fully use that task the way they want to. And so you could build a very slim Workday Extend app that just sits in place of that built-in task and exposes more of the functionality. So those are just a few, and we can certainly follow up with a bigger list after this.
Awesome. Yeah, it's amazing what you guys can do with Extend. How much time and project should be dedicated toward design?
I can tackle that one too. I'd recommend about 20 to 25% of the project timeline be dedicated to getting to design finalization. Now, because we're talking a little bit of an iterative approach, I'd say towards the end of design, you could start to build the screens in Workday Extend, not necessarily hook them up to any endpoints, but just start to flesh out those wireframes with sort of stubbed out Workday Extend screens. And so you're starting to move towards what the actual look and feel is going to be, but again, focusing on using that as a tool to iterate your design.
Thanks, Nicholas. And then just as a reminder, we will be sending this presentation out to everyone who attended today. And one more question. Can you further explain the purpose of the internal follow-up discussions that should occur after discovery sessions?
Yeah, I can take that one. Probably the best way I can describe it, I'll just give you a real life example quickly. Myself, Nicholas, and Rob Pelouse went to a client onsite not too long ago where we went through an all-day discovery session on an Extend app for a particular customer. And on the car ride back to the airport, and it was probably about an hour-long drive, the three of us really flushed out a lot of different technical details and some follow-up questions for the client, all while we were in that car ride, and even when we were actually at the airport grabbing an early dinner. So, and again, it kind of speaks to the value of the fact that, we just came out of that session, so everything is fresh, everything is there, and the energy that you get from those discovery sessions is still there. So there's a lot of value in those follow-ups just so you can really get more answered, more things flushed out, post-discovery. So.
All right, thank you. Thanks for everyone who attended. Thank you to Nicholas and Ken. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. And we will be sending this presentation to everyone who attended today. Any other comments, Nicholas or Ken?
Nope, that about covers it.
Yep, not for me either. Thank you.
Perfect. Everyone have a great day.